Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. These are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to tonight's program with Matilda Bernstein Sycamore, presented in partnership with Elliott Bay Book Company. We're grateful to our author series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times for generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everyone in our community. I have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Our friends over at Elliott Bay Books have copies of Matilda's books. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery, and you can find books at their website, elliottbaybook.com, and we'll be posting links to Matilda's books and some of the other contributors' books in the chat throughout the course of the evening as well. We have auto captioning available tonight, and to access that, you just need to click on the icon at the bottom of your screen. And after tonight's conversation, we'll have time for questions from you. You can ask your questions at any time by writing it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we'd love to hear from you. Toward the end of the program, we'll post a link to a survey in the chat, and I'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes after the event to share your thoughts with us. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Karen Maeda Allman from Elliott Bay Book Company, who will introduce tonight's speakers. Hi, Karen.
Hello, and thank you so much, Stesha, and thanks everyone for coming to this event. We've been looking forward to it for such a long time, and I can't believe the day's here. So, Seattle writer Matilda Bernstein Sycamore is an essayist, novelist, critic, activist, and provocateur. In the years since she has made Seattle her home, she has joined us many times at the Seattle Public Library, at Hugo House, and with us at Elliott Bay. Her previous books include The End of San Francisco, which was a Lambda Literary Award winner, and her novel Sketch-to-See, one of NPR's best books of 2018. Her most recent memoir, The Freezer Door, was much admired in our community and also was named a New York Times Editor's Choice, one of Oprah Magazine's best LGBTQ books of 2020, and was a finalist for the Penn Gene Stein Book Award. And in 2023, we also look forward to another book, Touching the Art, which will be published by Soft Skull. But it's through her anthologies that many of us encounter her work for the first time, and also subsequently. And she's helped to shine a light on the work of so many writers in such books such as Nobody Passes, That's Revolting, and Why Are Faggots So Afraid of Faggots? Blaming challenges to masculinity, objectification, and the desire to conform. And this book was an American Library Association Stonewall Honor book. Anthologies are a lot of work to assemble, lots of blood, sweat, and tears. They're a lot of work to edit and to sell, and they are seldom as compelling, as beautiful, as complex, and as revolutionary as this one. So she's here tonight to launch her anthology, Between Certain Death and a Possible Future, Queer Writing on Growing Up with the AIDS Crisis, which was published this week by Arsenal Pulp Press and already mentioned in the New York Times. Some of you listening in tonight might remember seeing her initial calls for pieces for this anthology and have been anxiously waiting. I think you'll be surprised, moved, enraged, and enlightened by the essays in this book, which tell some of the stories of a specific queer generation. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn things over to Matilda Bernstein Sycamore to introduce the book and also tonight's panelists. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen, for that beautiful intro. And thank you to the library in Elliott Bay for hosting us tonight. I'm so excited about this book launch. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight to the book launch for Between Certain Death and a Possible Future. So this book came about when I realized that there was a missing generation in AIDS literature and cultural politics. Usually, we hear about two generations. The first coming of age in the era of gay liberation, and then watching entire circles of friends die of a mysterious illness as the government did nothing to intervene. And now we hear about younger people growing up with effective treatment and prevention available and unable to comprehend the magnitude of the loss. We're told that these two generations cannot possibly understand one another and thus remain alienated from both the past and the future. But there's another generation between these two, one that came of age in the midst of the epidemic with the belief that desire intrinsically led to death and internalized this trauma as part of becoming queer. I am a part of this generation. We share experiences with both of the more commonly portrayed generations. Maybe we are a bridge between them. This is my 6th anthology, and with every new project, I always start with an open call for submissions that I circulate as widely as possible, so I can bring together the broadest range of perspectives. When I was writing the call for submissions this time, I was careful not to impose specific dates on the generational frame, because I knew this would vary depending on a wide variety of factors, including race, class, gender, religion, ethnicity, rural or urban experience, regional or national origin, HIV status, and access to treatment and prevention over time and in shifting contexts. I knew that any generational frame only offers a partial truth. So I didn't want to impose artificial boundaries. I wanted to put out the idea and see who responded. I originally thought of this anthology as including anyone who came of age sexually in the midst of the AIDS crisis before the advent of effective treatment. But one thing that happened as soon as I started reading submissions was that the scope of the book expanded to include some people growing up well after the emergence of protease inhibitors, but still experiencing the feeling of growing up between certain death and a possible future. To me, an anthology is an intervention. My goal is not to create a definitive text, but to inspire more stories from even more angles, to facilitate even more conversations, to deepen the analysis, to complicate the narratives. As I was working on this anthology, I was flooded by my own memories. So many stories that I'd almost forgotten, hovering at the edge of my awareness. Like when I was 19 and I drove cross country to move to San Francisco. What I remember most from that drive was stopping at a rest area somewhere in the middle of the country where I'd never been, getting out of the car to throw out my trash. And while I was stretching, the rest stop attendant came out wearing orange rubber gloves that went up to his elbows. And he pulled my trash out of the garbage and put it in a giant blue plastic bag that he immediately tied to dispose of elsewhere. "You need to leave," he said, "or I'm going to call the cops." To be a 19-year-old faggot at a rest area in so-called middle America in 1992 meant you were a threat. What if someone got AIDS from your trash? In San Francisco, I found the dykes and fags and gender-bending weirdos and other outsider queers like myself. We needed one another to survive the world that told us we deserved to die. We broke down every day in every way, but we believed we are creating something else. We needed to believe in order to live. In San Francisco in the early 90s, AIDS was everywhere. And now I realize how much shutting off was required to exist in day-to-day experience. You couldn't express shock at everyone dying right in front of your eyes because shock felt like a form of cruelty. So you would act like everything might be okay, even when nothing was okay. You met some queen on the street and she was showing off her lesions in a campy way, and then she was dead. You went to the beach with a group of people and some boy was flirting with you, and then you were asking around about him. There was that look in his eyes and you wanted to see that look again, but he was dead. You slept with someone you knew was positive and he wanted to make it romantic, so he lit candles around the bathtub before you got in together. And a few weeks or months went by and you wonder what happened to him, but he was dead. I didn't go to memorials because I felt like I didn't have a right to be there. I felt like I would be stealing other people's grief. And this is a generational story too. We were coming of age in the midst of all this death, but we felt like it was not ours to mourn. If there's one thing I want this anthology to do, it's to open up the possibilities for feeling everything. Grief is not something you can steal. You can silence it, yes. And I think that's what our culture has done. Dominant culture, gay culture, queer and trans cultures. The grief has become internalized, and the consequences have been devastating. Intimately, interpersonally, culturally, and communally. In this anthology, there are 36 essays from an expansive range of contributors. I could have included many more. Every time I read through the book, I find myself getting emotional in surprising places, even after the work has become so familiar. I can't predict what you will feel, but I can predict that you will feel. Maybe it'll be grief or rage or loss or laughter or longing or curiosity or inspiration or empathy or craving, expansion or contraction, devastation or catharsis, connection or confusion, revelation or confirmation, or all of this at once. Let's talk about everything so we can feel everything. Let's feel it all so our future remains possible. So thank you again, everyone, for coming tonight. Let's have a round of virtual applause for everyone in the room. The 4 contributors we have here tonight, as well as everyone joining us. And also, people feel free to light up that chat. I should have said that ahead of time because we want comments, feedback, bring it on so we know you're all here. Otherwise, we might feel a little lost. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And also, I want you to know there's going to be a Q&A after these 4 brilliant contributors read from their pieces in the book. And so if you have any questions at any point, you just throw them right into that Q&A function. You know, it's like right, I'm just going to point to it. It's like right here. So you can, yeah, and also just comment, give us these, I love this applause, love it. So we like seeing that people are joining us. I love all these familiar names. And yeah, just to make it feel as much like, because to me, an anthology is a communal conversation. And so I want that feeling here tonight. in whatever way we can conjure it, in our own rooms and in this room we have here together. So yeah, oh, and also, of course, one thing that you can do in a virtual reading that you can't do when you're in person is you can buy the book at any point. So you can click that link and all books will be signed. They've just arrived today, and they'll be signed and sent out to anyone who gets them. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first contributor that we have here tonight. Now, Baron McKenzie is crossing that virtual border between these two countries now known as Canada and the United States. Baron is an award-winning freelance playwright, writer, actor, and producer. His writing credits include Bloodbath at St. Paul's, Fashion Police, Meet the Months, and Jonesin, as well as his 2 full-length plays, Get Off the Cross, Mary, and the critically acclaimed children's play, NGG RFG. Baron is currently part of the inaugural year of the Warner Media X Global Access Writers Academy and has been chosen as the 2021-2022 BIPOC Fellow for the prestigious Catalyst Theatre Confluence Fellowship in Edmonton, Alberta. Please welcome Baron McKenzie.
Thanks, Matilda. Thanks for inviting me. And thank you to the Seattle Public Foundation. I appreciate it. This is my story, Hockey Night in Canada. Edmonton, 1984. I am underage and working in the gay bars. Randy is a waiter. I am a busboy. Randy is bearded and into leather. I am small and effeminate. I am told I look like a girl. He has a laugh that fills the room and his eyes dance with mischief as he chases men around the bar. Randy is always having sex, and I am jealous because it isn't ever with me. Randy gives me a key to his apartment, so I always have a place to go. He sleeps in and I clean up while watching soap operas and the Oprah Winfrey Show. One day I hear Oprah talking about the gay cancer. Her guest is a man with purple marks on his face. You are going to die of that. I push the thought out of my head and take the dirty dishes to the kitchen. One day, Randy asked me to meet him at his favorite restaurant at 4 p.m. He has to tell me something. He is drunk and has been crying. I have it, the cancer, the gay fucking cancer. As he speaks, I can see the same purple blemish on his temple that the guy on Oprah had. I reach across the table and grab his hands. He cries and drinks until he is falling out of his chair. I ask for the check and take him home. The next day, he is up early. He is cheerful and resolute, like nothing is wrong. I need you to take care of the cats. I'm going to travel, New York, San Fran, and Boston. I'm calling it my Screw You Tour. I'm going to fuck my way across America and give it to everyone that gave it to me. I am left alone in his apartment for a month. I am lonely and depressed. It all starts to sink in. He's going to die soon. I can hear it in his voice. Every time he calls me, he sounds weaker. I can feel the walls closing in on me. Everyone I know and care about is now getting sick. Randy phones me late one night, wasted. I'm coming home. I'm ready. I light candles in the bedroom and change the sheets on his bed. Randy looks so different from the man who left a month ago. He has lost most of his body fat and his face looks like a wooden puppet. The purple blotches are everywhere. I sit him on the edge of the bed and take his hand in mine. Sleep with me. Have sex with me so I can die with you. His eyes flash with rage. Spit flies out of his mouth as he screams inches from my face. You selfish fuck. You have everything going for you. Look at me. Look at my face. I'm covered with fucking lesions. You are pristine and young and smart and beautiful. Where do you get off asking me to kill you? Get out. Get out of my fucking house. He kicks me out of his apartment and refuses to see me again. I am bussing tables at the bar when one of Randy's fuck buddies tells me that he's dead. I am 16 years old. Vancouver, 1994. The lesions on my legs keep moving up. The sores cover my feet from the tips of my toes to just above my ankles and show no signs of stopping. I have nerve damage and my feet are hypersensitive to the touch. Even a bed sheet brushing against them makes me scream out in agony. The specialist says this is because the AIDS virus has nowhere to go, so it is settling in my extremities. Feet first, hands later. His main concern is to control the pain and stop the spread of the lesions. If he can't, they may have to consider amputation. I have been placed on a number of pain pills, but have built up a resistance to them. Now I am on liquid morphine, which I can administer myself every 4 hours through a shunt in my arm. The doctors don't know about my addictions: cocaine, alcohol, sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medications, Valium, morphine, Dilaudid, Neocitrin. My trips to the doctor are exhausting and I get in bed as soon as I arrive home. The ringing phone jolts me out of my sleep. I hear a tired voice on the other end. It's time. Tom is whispering. He doesn't want to wake up Billy Boy's mom, dad, and brother who arrived yesterday. Billy Boy's family disowned him after he came out of the closet. They just showed up out of the blue when they heard he didn't have much time left. Tom is an angel who stepped in to help when Billy Boy needed care. They met in Edmonton and moved out to Vancouver together when they were teenagers in the early 80s. Tom and I dated the same man at separate times. We became fast friends. If you want to say goodbye, now is the time. The doctors say he won't make it through the night. The guys will pick you up in about an hour. I hear noises in the background that sound like an animal moaning. Tom says he has to go and hangs up the phone. My pain right now is really bad and I have to get it under control before Sandy and the other guys pick me up. I hate taking this drug with me everywhere I go, so I load up my syringe with extra cc's of morphine and push it through the shunt in my arm. I pack a flap of leftover cocaine in case I need to take the edge off, and I wait. I examine my bloodshot eyes in Billy Boy's bathroom mirror. I wipe the last remnants of cocaine off the tip of my nose. I look like shit. The familiar feeling of numbness mixed with stinging in my feet is starting to return, which means the last hit of morphine is wearing off. I should have brought some with me. Hopefully, I won't be here too much longer. I open the bathroom door and see the three factions. In one corner of the living room, Billy Boy's family sits watching the hockey game. At the opposite end and squished into the dining room are 15 of his closest friends, ranging from my age to the respected old guard of our community, the gaggle of gays. In the middle of the living room, separating good and evil, lies Billy Boy, moaning on the hide-a-bed. We've been here for hours. The doctor said he would be dead soon, but Billy Boy is being stubborn as usual. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baron, for that beautiful reading. Let's have a round of applause for Baron McKenzie. Feel free to throw your comments into the chat. And I'm going to introduce our next contributor. E.J. Colin is the author of What Weaponry? A Novel and Prose Poems, poetry collections, Money for Sunsets, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist in 2011, and Waiting Up for the End of the World Conspiracies. Flash fiction collection, Dear Mother Monster, Dear Daughter Mistake. Long poem, lyric essay hybrid, The Green Condition. Fiction collaboration, You're Sick. And fiction collaboration, True Ash. Nonfiction editor at Tupelo Press and freelance editor, manuscript consultant. She teaches at Western Washington University. Please welcome E.J. Colin.
All right, thank you so much for that, Matilda. And thank you, Stesha and Karen, for helping organize this event. I'm really pleased to be here. I will just jump in. All right. 1988. In the unoccupied girls' locker room between lunch periods, a boy named Asher licks the side of your face and runs his fingers over the back strap of your bra. You can smell peanut butter on his breath and a light scent of body odor, which you hold on to as something to remember and think about later. Show me your bra, he says, if it had been a question. Part of you still wants to. You are one of only 3 girls in the 6th grade who wears one. No, you say. You're fat, he says. You shrug. You're a fat whore. I don't think you know what that means. In health class, you play a kind of bingo about all the ways one could catch AIDS. You make a list of images drawn in boxes and a yes, can catch AIDS, no, can't catch AIDS to circle next to each. Answer key. Share a razor. Yes, can catch AIDS. Share a toothbrush. Yes, can catch AIDS. Share utensils. Yes. Deep kissing. Yes. A kiss on the cheek. No. You noted even then, you and Cass, that there was no question about sex. Isn't sex how most people get it, you ask? Cass is sexually active already, though you try not to think about that, or about how the boys seem way too much older than her. You try not to think about whether she uses a condom. In class, Asher stares at the side of your head from 2 rows away. You can feel it. Later, he will tell you he's glad he never kissed you, glad he didn't let you suck his dick. He tells you you are a fat whore with AIDS. Your interest in boys is strong and you will kiss them every chance you get. You decide mouths are fine. The information you are taught is constantly evolving, but that penises are not worth the risk. And so you never do more than touch them. Please, all 3 boyfriends in high school ask, but even if they go down on you, you refuse to reciprocate. 1994. Mel was getting fucked by a self-proclaimed slut when the condom broke in his ass. This was months ago. Mel has sex with a lot of people, but hasn't done anything since. You have to go, you say. You say you'll go with him. I don't want to know, he says. Why? False positives. You know the latest test avoids most of that. Bullshit, you say. Okay, I just don't want to know. I always said I wouldn't want to know. I'm worried someone will find out I got tested at all, that I was worried about it. They're looking for any reason to fire me at work. But finally, he says he'll go to the clinic, give up some blood, take a number, wait for the call. I don't think I want to do this, he says when he arrives to meet you at the clinic. What if I do it too? You know I hate needles. You go inside. You have a doctor at the time who says you don't need pap smears if you aren't having sex with men, won't perform them. My mother had cervical cancer, you tell her. It doesn't matter. The doctor doesn't say she's uncomfortable treating lesbians, but you get that impression and you never go back. You will go years without going to a doctor at all. Mel gets his paperwork, starts to fill it out. I want to get tested too, you tell the man behind the desk. He looks skeptical before you even open your mouth. Are you sexually active? Your haircut, your baggy clothes, the Bush hates me because I love Bush pin on your lapel. Quite, you say. With men? No, you don't need this test. No question about your sexual history, your drug history. I want the test. He shrugs and pushes the clipboard at you. 2 weeks later, the results, you're both negative. Mel waits 3 years to get tested again. You think being told he was negative once was enough to convince him he would be safe. 3 years later, Mel will test positive, but you're still not ready to talk about that. 1994. Sam comes home from the bookstore with a pocket full of dental dams and puts them on the kitchen table in front of you and says, we're trying these tonight. You laugh. You've been exclusive almost 4 months. I'm not kidding, she says. We're having safe sex tonight. I want to see what it's like. For when you finally decide to have sex with that girl you work with, so you don't bring something home. Exactly. I want to know how it works. That night, you open the plastic packaging, carefully unfold the tiny square of latex, and take turns spreading it over each other's parts and licking. This isn't fun, she says. I can't taste anything but plastic. It's certainly different, you say. You pull a condom out of her bedside table and cut the tip off the way the instructions she'd found somewhere had said to do. Cut a slit up the side and open it up. You try all the ways the pamphlet suggested, knowing this will likely be the only time either of you try this experiment. Later that night, before drifting off to sleep, you tell her, just don't go down on her without talking to me first, okay? And I can decide if I want to stick around. 1997. You and Peter go out dancing every weekend, and every weekend he stays at your house because it's walkable from back street, and he's usually too fucked up, and that way he won't go home with some random guy. The first time he stays on the couch, but your roommate says it's unacceptable to have to tiptoe around a stranger until 2 p.m. So he stays in your bed and it's nice, and you giggle and talk about the boys he has seen and the girls you have seen. And you say how happy you are you're both single so you can curl around each other telling stories and laughing until you fall asleep at 6 a.m. every Saturday night, Sunday morning. Then one night he kisses your mouth to say goodnight, and you open up your mouth a little. And the next thing you know, you're making out. And after that, that's how you go to bed every Saturday night, Sunday morning, talking a little and then making out for a long, long time. You're a really good kisser, Peter says. You too, you say. And you are usually out of your mind on MDMA or coming down. And in any case, it feels especially good to have a mouth on you. And a few times he kisses your tits because they fascinate him and they don't really feel like they belong to you. So it doesn't matter to you, but it never goes any farther than that. Then Peter moves to New York with some guy he dated the year before, and you don't hear from him for a long time. Your feelings aren't too hurt though, because you have his number and you haven't called him either. You run into a mutual friend at a party one night, maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months later, who tells you Peter got sick and has been in the hospital a few weeks. I guess he had a regular cold that turned into the flu or something, and then a respiratory infection that landed him in the hospital, and he's been there ever since. Is his mother there? She is, yes, he tells you. Do you have his number, you ask? And he shakes his head no, but says he can find it and get back to you, and he never does. And when you run into him again, another month later in Publix, he tells you that Peter died the week after he saw you, and he was sorry not to have let you know. And that the understanding is it was AIDS related, that Peter hadn't known he was positive and he was fine until he wasn't, and then it was over. The obituary only said flu, he said. Can you fucking believe that? Had he never gotten tested? I think not, he said, but I don't really know. And suddenly you're standing in the chip aisle in Publix thinking about Peter pulling your hair and how you'd bite his lips sometimes because of that. Sometimes a bit too hard, but all in good fun. Once or twice to the point of blood. You fucker, he would say. And you would tell him he was the fucker and to stop pulling your hair so hard. And at least one time there was blood on his shirt in the morning. Did I do that, you had said? Who the fuck else, he had said. You're standing in the chip aisle and your mind is racing, but everything around you is still. And the guy who has just given you this information is standing there silently watching it all sink in. And the low static that has been present the whole time, the humming from the fluorescent lights, seems to fill the space. And then the music that had somehow paused starts up again, and Madonna's La Isla Bonita comes on. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful reading, EJ. Let's have a round of applause for EJ Kolen. Take your time to throw in whatever comments you would like. Appreciation. And now our next contributor will be Laura Lemoon. Laura Lemoon is a queer, neurodivergent sex worker and sex trafficking survivor. Their writing, interviews, and activism work have been featured in the Huffington Post, AP News, NBC, Rolling Stone, the CBC, BuzzFeed News, and Vice. Laura has collaborated with the Centers for Disease Control, the US Department of Justice, local health departments, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime as a peer advisor on issues related to HIV vulnerability among people in the sex industry. They live in Seattle with their rescue pup, Coco Bean. Please welcome Laura Lemoon.
Hi, thanks, Matilda. And thank you, everybody who read. Everybody was just amazing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into my piece. I apologize ahead of time. My camera on my laptop is broken, so I have to use my iPhone. Okay. As a kid, I learned that to have sex without a condom meant you were a bad, immoral person. Safe sex was a matter of life and death, especially before 1996, when the only form of AIDS medications were toxic and ineffective. I grew up with a mom who was a nurse who would tell me horror stories of the earliest days of AIDS. People with AIDS would come into the hospital already moments away from death, and she described the trauma of just trying to make patients as comfortable as possible for their deaths, because in the 80s, death was basically inevitable. My mom was one of the only nurses who would treat these patients before HIV was discovered, when no one was certain how AIDS was transmitted, and nurses practically wore hazmat suits or refused to treat people with AIDS. What I learned as a kid in elementary school health class, as well as from the world at large, was that safe sex was a moral issue, which only served to reinforce the lie that HIV/AIDS is a moral issue, which to me means that when I'm manic and having sex with a zillion guys back to back with no condoms, because I'm delusionally obsessed with giving myself an STI, my bipolar disorder is now a moral issue. Even when I'm on my meds, not manic, and not actively trying to contract STIs, guilt and shame are constantly directed my way for exercising my right to consensual pleasure and my right to make a living on my own terms. I remember going to the gynecologist a number of years ago, and for some reason, my gynecologist asked me how many people I'd had sex with in the past 3 months. I wasn't there for anything STI related, and I can't remember how many partners I said exactly, but I think it was something like 20. She turned around and looked at me and repeated, 20 sexual partners in the past 3 months? Yes, I said, more than slightly annoyed. And what do you use for protection? I don't, I replied. She proceeded to tell me how irresponsible I was being, how I was neglecting my health and well-being, and how I clearly didn't understand that I was leaving myself vulnerable to STIs. I wish I could say this interaction with the doctor was unique for me, but sadly, it's very much par for the course. There are a few things in this interaction I take issue with. First, there are more ways to protect, quote unquote, I hate this word, myself than just condoms. I take PrEP. I have open conversations with my sexual partners about the fact that I don't use condoms so that they can decide for themselves if they still want to have sex with me. I get tested every 3 months. And most importantly for me, I know that taking my bipolar medications is crucial for my overall health and well-being. I can't take care of my sexual health if I'm not taking care of my mental health. It's just that simple. When I'm on my bipolar meds, I may still decide not to use a condom with a partner, but at least I know I'm taking other precautions and making decisions from a place of balanced brain chemistry. Healthcare professionals are visibly shocked when I try to ask for help with my mania and the way it manifests, and they reinforce the false message that HIV is a death sentence in 2020, or that to contract genital herpes or syphilis is shameful. For a while, I would just lie and say I used condoms, just so I didn't have to be treated like an idiot. In 5th grade, my health class teacher told us condoms protect against AIDS, always use condoms. What's remarkable is that conversations around safer sex, from school health class in 1995 to doctors I see in 2020, have not evolved past use condoms no matter what, period. No, not period. There is so much more to be said about safer sex than using barrier methods. And we need to get beyond using shame as a scare tactic to get people to use condoms, which are not the only defense against HIV transmission anymore. The landscape of sex in 2020 is very different from what it was in 1981, when the CDC first mentioned what would later become known as AIDS in its Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Now medication can make HIV undetectable and untransmittable, PrEP can prevent HIV transmission without condoms. HIV STI testing is widely available and often free, and general HIV education is widespread, particularly in communities of men who have sex with men. As a queer, non-binary sex worker, I mostly had sex with gay and bisexual men in my personal life, whereas most of my professional partners were straight men. I had much more difficulty navigating HIV and STI risk in my professional life than in my personal life because of the criminalization of sex work. This meant my ability to talk openly with a client before sex was limited in so many ways. It was a risk for me to even have condoms on me or to ask the client to wear a condom, especially if I did this after I accepted money, which meant that condoms could be legally used as evidence against me. An additional difficulty is that in spite of all the work that has been done in gay male communities to destigmatize HIV, almost no real work has been done among heterosexual men to normalize conversations about HIV and STIs. So if a female-bodied person, such as myself, who dates cishet men are diagnosed HIV positive, our challenges are completely different from those of our gay male counterparts. Cishet men are complete idiots about HIV and STIs. So when I date straight men, there is usually an even stronger belief that I must be HIV positive if I have done sex work. Whereas I find that when I date men who have sex with men, there isn't as much whorephobia and fear and ignorance around HIV and STIs. I recently had a man say to me upon my disclosure that I used to be a sex worker, "So do you have HIV?" I got angry because, first of all, why would it matter if I did have HIV? And second, how dare he assume that because I used to be a sex worker, I have HIV? As a kid, it was drilled into my head that only bad people have sex without a condom. But as an adult, I'm able to see and pinpoint the shame much more clearly. I realize this messaging really only serves to reinforce stigma against people living with HIV, that they are bad people who are irresponsible about their health and got what they deserved. In 2018, while working for the county health department, I was training a coworker on the HIV rapid test when 2 dots appeared on my results window, indicating the presence of HIV antibodies. I remember thinking there was no way I could tell people I contracted HIV through barebacking with clients, the ultimate sex worker taboo. If you think sex workers would be understanding about this, you're dead wrong. They're the hardest people to talk about my choice to bareback. I'm bringing shame to the sex worker name. There has been a push in sex worker communities to make sure that those who are vocal about our work promote condom usage in all cases to protect sex workers and sex work as a whole from bad public perception. Most out and public sex worker activists talk about sex work only in positive terms. This is a protective measure for a community often on the defense. Unfortunately, this image-conscious messaging has also been used to shame sex workers who might reinforce negative stereotypes about sex work, intentionally or not. The presumption of much of the general public that sex workers are dirty, quote unquote, or STD ridden, quote unquote, is certainly an awful and negative stereotype. But putting it on the backs of all sex workers to be living embodiments against those stereotypes is not a fair burden to bear. Because I got my preliminary positive at work from a trainee, I was embarrassed by the result, so I pretended like I already knew my status. Internally, I felt like my spirit left my body in that moment when I saw the positive test results. Who did I get it from, and to whom could I have transmitted it? I had no idea. The possibilities were endless. How was I going to tell a doctor that I was having unprotected sex with countless people I didn't know, and that there was no way to find them or get in contact with them? Talk about shame. I beat myself up endlessly. Normally, if you received a preliminary positive test, you would get a confirmatory blood draw right then and there. However, since I didn't get my test at a clinic, but at work, the process took longer. It took me about 2 weeks of sitting with the preliminary positive test before I could even tell anyone. I got my initial positive test, and the whole time I was thinking, oh my God, I'm such a dirty whore. I'm such a stereotype of the HIV positive prostitute. Who will ever love me? Who will ever want to have kids with me? The issue I was struggling with most was, how will any cis het man ever accept my status when straight cis men still think you can get HIV from a toilet seat? It was the queer community and my queer friends who surrounded me with love and support during this time. I'm so lucky that my best friend, who is HIV positive, was so good to me and was such a great shoulder to lean on during this time. He never judged me for my sexual behavior, and he not only helped me find a knowledgeable doctor, but he also made the appointment for me and went with me to get my confirmatory test. The whole process took about a month, and it turned out that my original test was a false positive. I was actually HIV negative. When I was 8 years old, I remember watching Liquid television on MTV, and a public service announcement began to play in which Pedro, an activist, person living with HIV, and member of the Real World San Francisco cast, started talking about how if you can't use condoms, you just shouldn't have sex at all. This cemented in my mind the gravity of living with HIV at a time when AIDS equaled death. And the message was that anything other than sex with a condom equaled death. In their 1994 hit, TLC sang about a man chasing waterfalls. The song referred to those 3 letters, HIV, meaning it was doom if you didn't play it safe sexually. Growing up, safe sex meant condoms. That was it. But that's not true anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Let's have a round of applause for Laura Lemoon. I love all these comments in the chat. Oh, and also people, feel free, if you have any questions, throw them into this Q&A, because we're gonna have a little time at the very end. So you're gonna wanna put your questions in there now. They can be questions for me, for any of the contributors, anything you wanna ask, feel free to throw it in there. Our final contributor this evening is Patrick Millian. Patrick lives and writes in Seattle. He teaches writing and literature at Green River College and is the author of the chapbook Pornographies. His poems and essays have appeared in the Denver Quarterly, 14 Hills, Mid-American Review, and Poetry. His book, The Unquiet Country, a collaborative project with the composer Emerson Eads, is forthcoming from Entre Rios Books. Please welcome Patrick Millian.
Thank you so much, Matilda. And thank you so much to everyone here. It's been such an honor to read alongside you. And thank you to the people that are sticking around. I'm glad everyone's still here. So I'm gonna read an excerpt from my essay, which is called Undead Disco. And I just wanna say that this excerpt is super important to me because in the version of this essay that I sent Matilda, a lot of this material didn't exist. She really challenged me. She asked some tough questions. She asked me to tell some hard stories. And in the end, an essay that was like way more fearless than I ever thought I could write ended up coming out of me. And so to share this space with other fearless people just feels incredibly, incredibly powerful. All right, let's read about disco. I was born the year Sylvester died, so everything I've encountered about him seems like an artifact of a forgotten history in which a Black gay man not only appears on Dick Clark's American Bandstand in makeup and a kimono, but he drives the audience nearly rabid with a performance that's nothing short of transcendent. The first song he plays, Dance, Disco Heat, grooves for an unrelenting 6 minutes as he and his backup singers raise their voices in a gospel of liberation. It's only matched by the second song, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, which somehow manages to push the tempo even faster. The fact that two of the greatest disco tracks both came from the same artist in 1978 is remarkable. That Sylvester put them on either side of the same single is almost unbelievable. But 10 years after that television appearance, almost to the very day, he died of AIDS-related complications at the age of 41. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times a few months before his death, he explained how he had been hospitalized 3 times for what he thought was bronchitis before finding out he had AIDS. It's fitting that the virus would begin to show itself in his voice, where an androgynous falsetto that wove together the sounds of his Pentecostal upbringing with those of Afro-Cuban rhythms would emerge. The excessive sounds of Black queer self-expression, of musical and sexual promiscuity were choked out for the world to hear. AIDS took disco by the throat. But in another story, disco doesn't go silent as much as it is drowned out. Sylvester embodies how a generation of Black gay men helped create the genre, but another generation gave it a second life. Starting in late 70s Chicago, DJs like Frankie Knuckles and Farley Jackmaster Funk were spinning at the Warehouse, a members-only club frequented mostly by Black gay men. As disco waned in popularity among mainstream Americans, a new genre of music, composed mostly of sampled dance music stripped of vocals, dismantled, and looped, could be heard most nights at the Warehouse. Eventually, that sound was named after its birthplace and became simply house music. Although Sylvester found himself at the center of American pop music, Black gay men reeling from the AIDS crisis found themselves pushed to the margins and building a music without the studio space and session musicians the label system once afforded. Instead, they reconstituted the remnants of the 70s by picking through the bits and putting them back together. By looping a 4-on-the-floor drum beat along with an Afro-Cuban clave pattern and squelching synth riffs from a misused Roland TB-303, DJs like Knuckles and Funk reimagined disco in a way that was darker and colder, harder but unrefined. House is the original deconstructed disco, stitched into the aural fabric of so much contemporary pop music. Maybe AIDS killed disco, but the music made in response to and out of that loss is ingrained in the sounds that sustain me and the queers of my generation. When I received my HIV positive diagnosis in 2012, my doctors all assured me that the virus would not kill me, that I would have a long and uncomplicated life. The consequences of my sins could be managed, and I could pass for a normal person. What I love about Robin and musicians like her is that her house and disco-infused version of pop is unapologetically abnormal. It's danceable and ecstatic, but if it sounds like disco reanimated, it's a zombie, embodied, evacuated, hungry. There's music that sounds like disco come back from the dead, but then there's disco that's undead, a sound much more consonant with my experience of being positive. No matter what songs you're choosing, though, the history of AIDS and the history of American popular music cannot be superimposed on one another. To select music to narrate the epidemic is to enact a violence by highlighting the deaths of some and erasing the deaths of others. Although I want to acknowledge both their contributions and losses, I also hardly need to say that the ones most frequently erased are trans people and people of color. As a mixed race cisgender man, I have always been struck by the image of the white gay man as splendidly degraded by AIDS as a ludicrous yet inescapable archetype for the epidemic. I was 23 and a year into a relationship with a white man in his late 40s when I was diagnosed HIV positive. He and I met during a stifling summer in Atlanta at a gay 12-step meeting. I'd been sober and in AA for a few years by that point, but I'd only recently moved to Georgia and intentionally sought out gay meetings to make friends and find dates. Most of the men I met were twice my age or older, and most had also been affected by HIV and AIDS, whether they were positive themselves or told stories about the friends and lovers they'd lost. These spaces were where I encountered HIV/AIDS in a more direct capacity. But even then, it was something spoken about in the past tense, in someone's rock bottom during their share, or marked by the slow limp of someone's leg muscles atrophied by AZT. Like the drinking and the drugs, though, HIV/AIDS seemed like something that had happened. And living with the virus was part of cleaning up the wreckage of the past, as the AA slogan puts it. I had already gotten sober, already done the work of the 12 steps. I didn't exactly consider myself immune to HIV, and I didn't think that relapse was out of the question for me either. But I had imagined a parallelism between HIV and active addiction. They were in the past, not my present. Plus, I felt fine. That wasn't how I put it to my partner, though. Instead, I lied and told him I had tested negative just a few months before meeting him. As confident as I was in my own status, a completely false confidence, considering how I had actually never been tested in my life, I wasn't so confident in his. We had one conversation toward the beginning of our relationship to this effect, but he reassured me that he knew he was negative. Maybe because he belonged to the same generation of gay men I had come to associate with AIDS. Maybe because he was only a few months sober and still liable to be dealing with the consequences of his drinking and using. Or maybe, and most likely, because I had so straightforwardly lied to him. I assumed he was lying too. I didn't trust him as far as unprotected sex went. The change didn't come with a conversation, but with a blowjob. One afternoon in early September, I was moving into a new apartment and my partner was helping. On a twin-sized bed I'd bought at the flea market, in a bedroom where he just smashed a palmetto bug with my shoe, he went down on me and efficiently brought me to orgasm. For the first time, he swallowed my cum. Coincidentally, my roommate came home immediately after. We quickly put our pants back on to finish unloading the car, and I never got the chance to reciprocate. But this was the instant our terms about sex changed. Swallowing my cum was his way of saying he trusted me, and it was enough to get me to trust him in return. Not long afterwards, he started getting sick. He'd experienced chest pains, abdominal cramps, vertigo, and a sore throat that never went away. I, however, felt totally okay. The possibility that HIV might be part of what he was experiencing occurred to me once or twice, but the thought never had enough presence for me to actually do anything about it. For reasons both real and imagined, it didn't make sense that two sober and monogamous men, one of whom was completely asymptomatic, could also be positive. When he finally suggested that we both get tested, I complied. His symptoms had proven not to be acid reflux, strep throat, or allergies, so I imagined these tests would be just another possibility to check off. He thought I was naive not to think that HIV and AIDS played a fundamental and concrete role in our health as gay men, and of course he was right. For me, HIV was something men of my partner's generation had survived, mourned, and memorialized. Though present, it was peripheral. His insistence that we get tested seemed like ascribing contours to something that was inherently indistinct. We, I believed, had passed through the haze of AIDS. We weren't supposed to come up against it. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful reading, Patrick. Let's have a round of applause for Patrick Millian. Thank you, everyone. Feel free, so all the contributors, if you want to come back into the room, we'll have a few minutes just for Q&A, conversation, chat. The first thing I want to say actually is just that as I knew, but I was so struck by all the layers of intimacy and camaraderie and desire and loss and longing and presence and absence and confusion and clarity and disparate dreaming and also the really wide range stylistically that each of you bring, you know, from a kind of lyric retelling to an analytical prose to an educational prose or a theatrical prose, storytelling, or all of these melded together. And so one question I was just coming up with was a two-part question for each of you or whoever feels driven to respond was one, how did it feel going back into these memories and writing these pieces? And two, how did you choose what style or form to take? Does anyone want to start with that question? Great, Berend.
Thank you, everybody. This was really amazing. Thank you so much. I just want to, so this is Billy Boy, and this is Randy. So I had them here with me tonight. Writing this story, I talked about writing this story for a really long time. And it is the first time in all the stuff that I've written, which has been quite emotional and very difficult to get through. I was running to the bathroom and dry heaving. I had a lot of shame about the fact that I was so addicted and so out of it and so terrified during this episode that, you know, we learn later on in the story that, you know, when we lifted him off of his diaper, his neck snapped back and he died very quickly after. So it really was a really cathartic, like I think tonight was the first night that I got shivers all over my body actually speaking this out loud. So yeah. What was the second? Sorry, what was?
Oh, it's just how did you choose the form that you chose?
Well, I've been experimenting with this first person actual, it's happening now in this moment. And I just found that for me, it's a great way for me to immerse myself within the text and to really sort of mine the feelings that I have, especially with a story like this, where I'm kind of shut down and not feeling like kind of numb. This allowed me to get into it, so.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to that question?
I can talk a little bit about the
Great.
form. One of the big like inspirations for my essay is this poem that D.A. Powell has, which is just it's just a playlist of disco songs that use heaven as like an extended metaphor to conflate sex and death. And so the poem's just a list of song names. And I love that the elegance of that and the way that like a playlist unfolds linearly as you listen to it, but the songs are always like speaking to each other and echoing off of one another. And so I wanted to write an essay that sort of felt like a playlist with bits and pieces that are collaged, but ultimately like put together for your listening pleasure with a clear beginning, middle, and end.
Oh, I love that. And I remember when you mentioned that in the piece. Yeah, anyone else want to speak to either part of that? How it felt to write the piece or the form, EJ?
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. I really love what Patrick had to say about how Matilda, about how you pushed him to revise and it became a different essay. And I know you and I had gone back and forth a little bit about some things that you wanted a little bit more of. And so I ended up trying to write I have the moment in the essay where I say, but I'm not ready to talk about that, right? And you asked me, okay, well, let's talk about that. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me see if I can do that. And I spent several days trying to get into that and being incapable of doing so. So there's still a lot about the experience, I think, that I don't have access to, and I don't know when or if I will. And so to get back into the emotion of things that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And even in terms of my experience with the AIDS crisis, to me feels like it was a wall between me and experiences I could have had. So even you asking this first question of us, I feel like, what right do I have to speak on this, right? And so even this, this experience is bringing up some emotions for me. So, yeah.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to respond to that question? One thing I want to say is, I do think actually, EJ, what you're saying, that's that same generational experience, right? That like, we don't have a right to tell our own stories because we aren't the generation that is supposed to be the most affected. And I think that is part of that legacy of trauma, and part of what I think comes through in a lot of the pieces is this in-betweenness, and I also think that's such a strength of everyone's work here, right? Is that everyone is speaking to the specificities of our own experiences and the complications, the contradictions, the inconsistencies, that felt sense, that that deeper, the place between language and somewhere else, right? And I think, I'm just really struck by that, all of those through lines. And I'm noticing, let's see, we're getting close to the time. We have 6 questions. So I'm just going to throw these questions out here. I'm going to look at them for a second and let's see. Okay, we do have someone saying, EJ, love your use of second person. So I would agree with that. Okay, let's see. I'm going to start actually with a question for me. Okay, there are 2 questions that are kind of combined. I'm going to combine them. Could you talk more about how you see the anthology functioning as intervention? And then what themes and through lines emerged through the creation of this anthology as the pieces in the book came together as a unified collection? How did this shape and shift the intervention you were hoping to make with this book? Oh my God. So that is in a sense like why I do an anthology, because I could write my own experience, right? But I want to put a question out into the world and see who relates and broaden, that whole. So we have 36, essays. We have 39 people. We have all of the conversations that are existing. Like, I was just struck just today by these 4 pieces and like all of the layers that are emerging, right? And I feel like for me, that's why I put out an open call for submissions, which is how I found all of the contributions here tonight and almost everyone in the book. And because I want that really broad conversation. And so the intervention for me is, one, intervening into this idea that there are 2 generations that are affected by the AIDS crisis or not affected, as the media myth goes, right? And that there is no way for them to talk. And so I want, here's this generation between, which is the one that the book is about. But then in writing the book or in editing the book, then I realized, oh, wait, this is actually going further into the present, right? And so that was the first thing that really shifted, because I did not place, a boundary on the experience, right? I wanted the experience of growing up between certain death and a possible future to come through in whatever ways the contributors wanted, and, felt necessary, right? And so some of the themes that emerged were ones that I expected, like racism and classism and misogyny and transphobia and their persistence. And some of them, you know, like there's a very nuanced and complicated conversation about PrEP that I think is not really happening in the world. There are like probably 6 pieces that center around PrEP and talk about it from all different places, you know, and so that's one thing that I think shifted. I think I guess the question of who is silenced, who is allowed to speak, that's a theme that I think comes out a lot. Of course, intergenerational, you know, conversations, the idea of community and its failures, the search for connection, camaraderie, loss, dreaming, desire. So those are some of the themes. I could go on forever, but I'm going to look here again at these questions. And okay, so one of them is actually very similar to the question I asked first. So I'll just throw it out there in case anyone sees this in a different way. In all these essays, the use of time, flipping through time and years, putting distance between then and now, I wonder, how does the use of passing time figure into the shaping or construction of emotions into a space of healing? Okay, so the healing is maybe a different direction. Does anyone want to speak to that or feel like we haven't addressed that, or does that kind of stand sort of as its own commentary? If anyone wants to speak to it, feel free to just let me know. Or yes, Baron.
I like that statement, that question, because I think, like, for me, there was so much trauma that I just stopped talking about it, and I stopped talking about my experiences with it. And I really got triggered because I wrote this right as COVID was happening, and that's how the story ends. And so I think that it's really important that, like, the time allowed me to be able to go into this a little further than what I might have if I had tried to write this a couple of years ago. Like, it just gave me something to kind of to connect to, and allowed me to look back and go, look at how I've grown and look at the life that I've lived. And now that's a celebration as opposed to something that's shame-based.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so I think we probably have time for just this one last question. Oh, before we have a last question, which actually blends right into what you just said, Baron. But I want to just mention to everyone, this is the very beginning of the book tour. This is the book launch. It's actually before the publication date. The books have just arrived at Elliott Bay, so you're getting them early if you get them from Elliott Bay. But the next event actually will be on Tuesday, which is the official publication date. And that's the whole book tour is virtual. There are 10 events. That one is at McNally Jackson in New York. And reading will be Hugh Ryan, Tony Correa, and Sassafras Lowry. And you can also look, you know, the whole tour is on my website and all of the invites. That's just MatildaBernsteinSycamore.com. So please, of course, spread the word and tell all your friends to come out and hear all this brilliance, right? Like, I feel like these conversations are not happening in the kind of nuance and intimacy and layering and depth, right? The depth of personality, the depth of awareness, the depth of perspective. And so that is, you know, so much of what this book tour is about. And so if you enjoy what happened, of course, tell your friends and harass them. It's hard to get people to come out now to virtual events, right? Because we're all like, oh my God. But I'm going to go to this last question before we all come back, because it connects exactly to what Baron just said. And it says, as the contributors read, I couldn't help but see overlap with some of what we're experiencing with COVID. There are similar layers of societal mistrust, guilt, grief, and fear. Has COVID resurrected emotions from AIDS experiences? If so, how have you dealt with this when we are especially isolated right now? Does anyone want to speak to that? Well, it's a big question. Baron has something to say.
I always have something to say. Like, you know what I figured out is I knew how to deal with this. I knew how to deal with this. I have been built for pandemics. I realized that through this. I knew how to isolate. I knew not to argue. I knew not to fight it, just to sink into it, let it happen, and take advantage of this time that I had. I've been here a year and a half alone in a new city. So I just knew exactly what to do. And I think that that's what the AIDS pandemic did for me, was it just gave me the blueprint for this happening again.
That's amazing. Yeah, actually that comes through in your piece, because Barron's piece, so the call for submissions for the anthology, the deadline was like right when COVID hit. So the call is way before, but so there are two pieces in the book and Barron's is one of them. Like the piece, you know, Barron's piece starts in 1984 and it ends in 2020. And the end is on a plane as the news headlines are going, you know, about COVID and everyone has their hand sanitizer out. And so it is, yeah, so it's strange framing in that sense, but it's interesting how the book kind of melds into it. And I wonder if anyone else has anything they want to speak to about those commonalities between AIDS and COVID and trauma and preparation and experience in the moment that we're living in now.
I feel like that is a huge conversation. So I don't actually have anything to say about that, but I had the privilege or opportunity of teaching an AIDS literature class last spring. I was already scheduled for that. So that, I mean, I had this incredible, sad opportunity to sort of redevelop everything that I had already developed for the class, right? And so I think that, you know, students read with a little more vigor things that I gave them to read, like David France's giant volume of How to Survive a Plague, right? Because they all wanted to know how to survive a plague in real time. And so the conversations coming out of that, I think, I mean, I'm not sure how I would have handled the early pandemic if it wasn't for those students and that class and that space. So that's not really answering the question, but just a statement also. And I also want to say, reiterate again, Matilda, how grateful I am for you and for your community building. And I've been talking about this anthology and how grateful I am, because this is something that I have wanted to teach for a long time and it didn't exist. So let alone the fact that I'm in it, but I'm just really grateful for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so beautiful. Thank you all for your wonderful pieces and all of your insight. I wish we could be in a room together so we could all give each other hugs. So I want to give everyone in the audience an opportunity to just open your arms and give us all hugs. And we'll bring Stasha back in to say goodbye from the library. I want to blow kisses to everyone. Let's blow each other kisses.
Well, huge congratulations to all of you. This book is really an amazing accomplishment and so important. And so thank you so much for the work that you put into putting it together, Matilda, and to all of the contributors for your contributions. It has been a really amazing evening. And, you know, we've been posting the link for folks to find the book at Elliott Bay in the chat. And so I just want to remind you one last time that Elliott Bay will have signed copies of this new collection, as well as other books by Matilda and the other contributors. The store is open for limited browsing, curbside pickup, and delivery, and you can find all of those books at their website, elliottbaybook.com. You can also just drop by the store. You know, they're open and it's a nice place to feel connected to other humans. So do that if you're able. We'd love to hear from you about tonight's program. So I'm going to post a link. I'm actually going to do it right now there. Post a link to a survey in the chat. And so would appreciate it if you take a minute and share your thoughts after the event. And I'm so grateful to everybody who made tonight's program possible. Thank you so much to our program partners, Elliott Bay Book Company, and specifically Karen, Maida Ullman, for her beautiful introduction. And thanks to our sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, for lighting up the chat and making us feel like we're all together in one room, even though we're all in our own like Zoom boxes. But someday soon we'll get together at the library. Maybe not the next book, but maybe the book after, Matilda, okay? You're planning 2 books ahead, right?
Yes, we'll be back in the library at some point.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and we will see you next time. Good
Thank you
night.
all. Mwah.
Thank you.